The zero RB draft strategy, it gets everybody all hot and bothered. I'm sure you guys are angered just clicking on this video. The three things that you're never supposed to talk about on a date: politics, religion, and the zero RB draft strategy. Everybody hates it, but we are going to break down everything from the myths to how to implement it properly and all things in between. So I'm really excited for this one. Danny, what's up? How you doing?
Doing well, and we saw a few of your recent comments on the last mock on the channel. A lot of you guys were upset. Javonte Williams is your running back one, David Montgomery is your running back one, not really understanding the strategy. So we thought it'd be a perfect time to reintroduce the zero RB draft strategy to the FSC channel.
Yeah, so this will basically be just kind of like a one-stop shop for everything zero RB. Let us know in the comments what you think of this breakdown, if you guys understand the strategy a little bit more because of it. And while you're down there, of course, leave a like and subscribe if this is the first time you guys are checking us out. But let's get right into it. All right, so quick outline of the structure of this video. We're going to start with defining zero RB and why it can be effective. Then we're going to talk about the RB dead zone. Then we're going to talk about when to use zero RB and, the league formats and the league markets that it can be most effective in. And then also we're going to touch on how scoring format kind of affects zero RB's effectiveness as well. And then finally, to kind of demonstrate everything that we talk about in this video, we're going to do a mock draft at the end for the first like 10, 15 rounds or so. And we're going to go back and forth. I'm going to be picking early in the draft. Danny will be picking late in the draft. And we'll talk about the various draft slots that zero RB and the targets, of course, that we're going after during that mock. So for those of you guys that don't know what zero RB is, I'll let Danny take it away with the, one-to-one definition for what zero RB is.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. This draft strategy, zero RB, is one that you can deploy during your draft where you essentially just fade the running back position until, round 7 or 8. You're drafting zero running backs until that round 7, 8 area, focusing on your wide receivers, your quarterback, and your tight end to potentially build up your flexes and build up your onesies. At the end of the day, when you know inherently going into the situation that you are going to be weaker at running back, you should be prioritizing being the top of your league every other position, getting, your Lamar Jackson at quarterback, getting, your Mark Andrews at tight end, and then filling in your wide receivers with potential league winners in between. The reason that we're going to do this, and I'll let you get into it in a second, is that running backs for the most part are pretty much guys that you can bank on missing a few games a year.
Yeah, after you've loaded up on all those other positions towards the end of the draft, that's when you're going to just select a vast combination of like handcuffs and rookies and ambiguous backfields, pass catching running backs. And those guys will get you by for the first while of the season, knowing full well that the thesis of this strategy is based around the fact that running backs inherently miss more time than the other position groups. And as the season goes along, your team will get stronger while other teams around your league will get weaker. Because you didn't invest so heavily into this position, you can then target the handcuffs of your league mates running backs and, the backup running backs that they're losing in their lineup to make your team inherently stronger. And again, we touched on the fact that, running backs miss more time. Here's the proof. Over the last 7 years, the top 20 running backs in ADP have missed an average of 3.09 games out of the 16, 17 that they play in a season, and a serious injury chance, so missing 6 or more games, of 19%. So we're talking like a 1 in 5 chance that your guy goes down with a huge, massive injury. And in a 10-man league, that's like 2 of the 10 people. In a 12-man league, that might be 2 or 3 of the 10 of the 12 people. Whereas the wide receiver position, on average, the top 20 wide receivers in ADP since 2015 missed just under 2 games per season and a 12.5% serious injury chance. So there is definitely a leg up when it comes to running back injuries versus wide receiver injuries, which again is the thesis of this entire strategy, the reason it was born in the first place. And like we said, because you have all of your other positions locked down, presumably, because you're going to overinvest in quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends, you can devote your entire waiver budget to just adding and cycling through running backs that can give you a week or 2 here and there. You can get, Sony Michel a couple years ago gave you a month of production. You can get, last year, Jamal Williams will give you some production potentially off of the waiver wire. All you're looking for is to fill out your running back 1 and 2 slot with like 12 to 15 points per game at best. Best case scenario, you can hit on a James Robinson from a couple years ago or an Elijah Mitchell from years past that give you an entire season of that production, but you're not really married to that idea.
100%. And the reason why you would deploy the zero RB strategy is basically just passing on running backs who don't possess a high enough ceiling to validate their opportunity cost. The reason why I say that is once you're dealing in that, round 3, round 4, round 5 area of pass, that was usually labeled the dead zone. Now we'll get into in a second how that may have changed, especially on more high stakes sites like Underdog Fantasy. But in the past, these round 3, round 4, round 5 profiles at running back, didn't have a clear-cut running back one level ceiling. Well, like you said, guys like Elijah Mitchell, guys like James Robinson are guys that you guys can pick up off of your waiver wire that can give you a similar projection to guys other people in your league are taking in round 3, round 4, round 5. So the premise of zero RB is that opportunity cost that they're spending on that running back at that pick, you're getting a set in stone wide receiver. You're getting an elite onesie, whether that's tight end or quarterback, and you're basically trusting your ability on the waiver wire to supplement that same production with guys, like I said, Elijah Mitchell, James Robinson. We've seen multiple examples in the past of guys being picked up weeks 1 to 3 that end up being the league winners, and they're almost solely running backs. The reason why that is the case, as we've said on the channel multiple times, is that running back is an opportunity-based position. Wide receiver is a skill-based position. Just because a wide receiver's on the field doesn't mean he can command targets. Usually when a running back's on the field, that's when he's getting his opportunity. So while, of course, you're going to see talent differences in some running backs, if any running back is getting or slated for 20 opportunities in a single game, he's most likely going to find his way into the top 15 of our rankings. Versus if a wide receiver is expected to be the wide receiver 2 or 3 in a game, we simply aren't vaulting him up the wide receiver ranks.
Yeah, and I mean, in practice, this results in you passing on a volume play like Miles Sanders in round 5 in favor of a different volume play in James Conner in round 8. It's essentially the same projection, and that's kind of also the theory of the dead zone, which we can get into, is that a lot of these running backs after the top 15 or so start to blend together. So there really is not much of a difference between RB 19 and RB 31, who, RB 19 might be going in round 4 or 5, and then RB 31 might be going in round 8 or 9. And in that area of the draft, there is a difference between the wide receivers. There is a difference between the tight ends and quarterbacks. And that's where you make up that difference in a zero RB. So the dead zone usually starts in round 4 and it usually ends in around 7, round 8 sometimes. And here's why we want to avoid the dead zone. Like I just said, the running backs kind of blend together, but also the hit rates of these running backs is about 33%. On average, you guys can see an 8.33% win rate in this table. What that inherently means is a 1 in 12 chance of that player paying off at their ADP, because 1 divided by 12 is 8.33%. Inherently, in a 12-man league, you should have a 1 in 12 chance of winning. But if a running back is giving you more than an 8.33% chance, it means that they were an asset to your team. They were helping you win your league. And when you look at the hit rates of running backs, it's only about 33% of the time that those running backs were giving you a greater than average win rate. Versus wide receivers, it was about 47% of the time. And actually, the last 2 years have been a little bit down. So it's possible that we see the dead zone wide receivers maybe hit at a bit of a higher rate. Last year, that number was about, half the time you were getting a pretty good wide receiver versus a third of the time you were getting a pretty good running back there in the dead zone. And honestly, at quarterback and tight end, I would argue it's probably even better of a hit rate, because you're getting, potentially elite studs like Jalen Hurts last year in this like dead zone area. You could have passed on Jalen Hurts last year for a dead zone running back that had no ceiling, like David Montgomery, for example.
Yeah, it was funny. I still remember in a couple leagues, I was able to get Jalen Hurts round 6, round 7. Everybody's worried about, oh, I got to grab my running back 2. I got to grab my running back 3. I got to build up my running back depth. Well, guess what? You're passing on an elite league winning level quarterback. Jalen Hurts last year, of course, we know the song and dance at this point, 25 point per game score, was one of the league winners. But even if he was a top 5 quarterback, it still would have been a much more beneficial pick to your team than any of those running backs, like you kind of mentioned that range. A guy like David Montgomery, who had some RB2 usage at some points in the year, but for the most part was kind of just a guy you didn't expect a high ceiling from.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're going to say throughout this video, the running back position is going to vary league to league. We're not going to know 100% of the time if zero RB can be effective until we're actually in a draft. For example, as we've kind of made reference to on Underdog Fantasy, people know that wide receivers are valuable, and inherently they're pushed up the board more than you might be in your bog standard home league where you're, tacos from work or drafting running backs in the first round every single year. So it is really going to depend on you. You guys watching this video right now, you guys need to take the advice and the strategies that we're talking about and implement it into your own league. Realize that, we're not in your league. We have no idea how people behave when it comes to this position. Zero RB might be effective for you, or it might not be effective for you if people are very heavily invested in running backs or not. So let's talk about some myths with zero RB, because a lot of people have some misconceptions about it. And that's why a lot of people are going to be mad probably in the comments that we're even talking about zero RB. So let's start with myth number 1.
Myth number 1 is that it simply doesn't work. I've seen like other content, media, like whatever the case is, whether it's Twitter, YouTube, podcast, you name it, there'll still be some old school fantasy analysis that, while it's the most scarce position. Like, why are you passing on the most scarce position? Like, it doesn't make sense. You have to load up on running backs. And if you guys are diehard running back truthers, you might be thinking that. How can it possibly be an effective strategy? But it literally won $1 million last year. The regular season BBM3 champion, King Capital, deployed a 0 RB to perfection in 2022. His first running back was Miles Sanders in round 8. Through his first 7 rounds, he drafted an elite tight end with Travis Kelce. He drafted 2 elite quarterbacks with Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts, and 4 hugely valuable wide receivers with Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Jalen Waddle, and Amon St. Brown.
Yeah, and he wrapped around in round 9 after selecting his first running back and taking Garrett Wilson there as well. So, I mean, his running back core was filled out with a bunch of ambiguous backfield options like Miles Sanders, like rookies Kenneth Walker, Dameon Pierce, Rachaad White. We didn't know those guys were going to be superstars, but as we're going to talk about once we get into the mock, these are the type of archetypes that we want to target. Ambiguous backfields, rookies, handcuffs like Khalil Herbert and Chris Evans, who he had on his bench as well. These are the types of players that we want to target. So with the 0 RB, again, it's always about doing it effectively. You can do a 0 RB improperly and it won't work. But if you do it effectively, like King Capital obviously did, then you can absolutely win some decent chunk of change. And I think we would all be happy if we won $1 million playing fantasy football. So myth number 2 is the opposite side of the spectrum, though, that it's always effective, because there are staunch 0 RB advocates that will always run 0 RBs. And that is definitely not what you want to do as well. What you want to think of with 0 RB, with hero RB, with any strategy, it's a tool for your fantasy tool belt. You can use it if you know how to use it effectively, but you only want to deploy it in a room where it's necessary. You don't want to go into a draft saying, I'm going to do a 0 RB because 0 RB is the best draft strategy. What you want to do is evaluate the draft as it's happening, take the best players on the board, and if you end up building out a 0 RB, that is when you use the strategy. Because as we're seeing this year on Underdog, the market has corrected itself to some degree. The success of the wide receiver position, or the lack thereof of running backs, has resulted in myself, in Danny, and Ron, staunch other 0 RB folks, actually drafting a lot of running backs because they're not so egregiously priced like they used to. So the big takeaway here is that you want to use 0 RB when it's necessary. You want to use 0 RB when 75, 80% of your league is overvaluing running backs. On a site like Underdog, it's less effective. But if you guys are watching this playing in a bog standard casual work redraft league, it definitely could still be a viable option for you if your whole league is going to zig while you zag.
Yeah, I think that was perfectly put. Tool under your tool belt is the perfect way to look at it, because we've been saying on FSE for a while that our favorite draft strategy this year is drafting the best overall players. If you're drafting a 0 RB and that is the best overall strategy for you because you're in an old school 2006 style draft room where you see 5 or 6 running backs in the first round, you see, 20 running backs go off the board by round 4, then conducting a 0 RB is literally just taking the best players available given their range of outcomes. So no, I completely agree with that analogy of a tool under your tool belt. If you can master this tool, then you can use it at all times whenever you need to. But of course, there's going to be some tools you're not going to have to use 24/7. It's just being able to use them when you have to is the epitome of why you want to learn the 0 RB, because if you have to do it, and you can do it correctly, you can build up some monster teams like King Capitals. But the last thing that I want to quickly touch on is the scoring format affects how viable 0 RB can be. If you're in a scoring format where, there's 3 wide receiver star, 2 flexes, maybe a super flex spot, full PPR league, 0 RB is going to be magnificent for you, because while everybody's, taking the running back 1s, taking the running back 2s, there are so many starting spots, specifically 3 wide receivers and 2 flexes, where you can supplement that production very, very easily. If you're drafting, 4 wide receivers through round 7 and a couple of your league mates only have maybe 2 or 3, well, guess what? You have an extra high upside full PPR play in your lineup that they're still trying to catch up to. I feel like the biggest misconception when it comes to 0 RB for the most part is that people are viewing it as, well, I want to fill out my starting lineup. Why am I taking my wide receiver 3 and 4 in a 2 wide receiver start league? Well, the reason being is you're actually filling out your flexes before people are even worrying about that. People are worried about their main positions, their quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, that they're not focusing as much on the flexes, because in years past, people kind of treated the flexes as, oh, well, I'm just going to spot in a play any given week. But if you can build a legitimate stud factor player in your flex spots, they're going to be more beneficial for you in the long run. So in terms of like a 3 wide receiver, 2 flex league, I think it's very, very viable. But let's say you play in a 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, bog standard, single quarterback type of room. Let's just say it's a half PPR. At that point, 0 RB isn't quite the beast that it is in a full PPR big starting lineup type of setting, because in round 6+, you no longer can build those advantages at quarterback, at wide receiver, and at tight end. So therefore, maybe getting a running back in that room is going to be more beneficial for you, especially if said running back early on has league winning upside. Like if Bijan Robinson falls to you at like pick 7 or pick 8 and you want to anchor around him there, that's far more applicable in that type of setting than, a 3 wide receiver start, 2 flex with a super flex.
Yeah, I mean, the thing it's going to come down to realistically is how many flexes you have and how many wide receivers you can start on a given week, and also if it's a super flex league or not, because in super flex, it definitely is more viable, I would say, than it is in single quarterback as well. So enough mumbo jumbo. We're going to stop talking about 0 RB. We're going to actually show you what 0 RB looks like. And what we're going to do in this draft is I'm going to be picking from early in the draft. So, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson area. Danny's going to be picking from later in the draft, more so at the 1-2 turn. And we're going to talk about, we're both going to build out 0 RBs, but we're going to jerry rig the board so that it looks like we're in a standard home league. And for those of you guys that play in leagues like this, it's going to be really effective and really helpful for you guys. And we'll kind of, build out our 0 RBs, showcase the strategy, and then at the end of the draft, kind of talk about some of the running backs that we did target to fill out the rest of our team. All right, so we are now into the draft. Like I said, I will be picking from the early portion of the draft at the 1-2 slot. Danny will be picking at the late portion of the draft from the 1-11. We are both going to execute a 0 RB, which, counterintuitively will mean that we're going for the same targets, but we are at different portions of the draft, so it shouldn't matter too much. So we're going to start this draft. As I mentioned, we're going to go through the first 8 rounds kind of in depth, and then at the end, we'll kind of look back at our teams and show you guys some of the targets that we took in the late rounds at the running back position predominantly. So for me, Jamar Chase is my 102. That's the guy that I'm going to go with. When you have either the first or the second pick, this is definitely something that's going to come into play for you in terms of the strategy that you want to employ, because, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase should be the first and second pick off the board. And those guys are obviously very, very big positional advantages of a wide receiver. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to jerry-rig the draft board a little bit so that Danny is faced with the decision, do I go with like the 6th best running back off the board, or do I want to pivot, potentially go to more of like a 0 RB format where I can build out a better positional advantage? Again, as we talked about throughout the video, this strategy is a tool in your tool belt. You don't necessarily want to go into the draft thinking you're going to go 0 RB, but when the board stacks up the way it does for Danny here, then you probably want to maybe pull out the 0 RB tool.
Yeah, 100%. And the way we're kind of looking at it here is a lot of like typical home leagues, you'll see your league mate may take Jonathan Taylor and wrap him around and get, Tony Pollard on the way back. But for me personally, I just prefer the projection of a guy like Stephon Diggs or CeeDee Lamb to the projection of a guy like Jonathan Taylor, 2 down back. Not a great offense there in Indianapolis. Whereas with Stephon Diggs, you're looking at a potential 175 target wide receiver, elite wide receiver 1 pairing with Josh Allen, who the Bills have one of the highest ceilings of any offense in the NFL. So for me personally, I'm just getting the elite 20+ point projection wide receiver over the maybe 18 point per game projection running back here with Stephon Diggs over Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind, too, we did set this so that the league format is conducive to a 0 RB. So we have a full PPR format, 2 wide receivers, 2 flexes. You can start up to 4 wide receivers in any given week. It's a 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. Again, this would be even more so effective if we could start up to 3 wide receivers and then 2 flexes, or whatever the case is. If it's a super flex league, it would also help as well. You're back on the clock. Unfortunately, Team 12 decided to go with some wide receivers on the turn. Again, we're playing this in the best way we can with the sleeper generator doing its magic, but we are still going to try and go 0 RB here. So who are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, my next highest rated player, regardless, would actually still not be a running back. It would be Amon-Ra St. Brown. Both of our next highest rated player, oddly enough, you're extremely high on him as well. You're even higher than I am. And I think this is a guy that can average 10 targets per game on one of the top 10 offenses in the NFL. So for me personally, the projection of Amon-Ra St. Brown, even a guy like Devontae Adams, I would also prefer to any running back on the board, because I do think that those wide receivers have a path to 20+ PPR points per game that, outside of maybe one running back in this range, I simply don't forecast. So for me, Amon-Ra St. Brown would be my next rated player.
Yep, and we see Taylor go off the board, Mahomes. Now we're starting to see some running backs, Derrick Henry. Again, this is kind of playing out a little bit more like a casual draft now. So the sleeper gods are with us. All three of the top quarterbacks go off the board before my pick. Definitely would have been in consideration for one of those guys if I wanted to go with one of them. I'm on the board here. My best available wide receiver is presumably Calvin Ridley, but I think I can get him on the way back. So I'd probably favor Jalen Waddle here. And then I also could consider a Mark Andrews there at the 3-2. I'm going to take Jalen Waddle and then probably Calvin Ridley on the way back, though.
Yep. No, I like that start as well. Calvin Ridley would have been a guy I targeted if he had fallen.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have, most likely, but definitely makes some sense. You might have the option to take Lamar Jackson here if you want to go with it, or you could continue stacking up at wide receiver.
Yeah, so my choice here would be between my next highest rated receiver, I believe, would be Devontae Smith versus getting a guy like Lamar Jackson. Now, could I play it risky and hope that Team 12 doesn't take another wide receiver? Or should I just take Devontae Smith and hope maybe he doesn't want to go with the early quarterback? I think in most points this year, if I'm stuck with this decision, I would prefer taking wide receiver with Devontae Smith slightly, simply because on the turn here, if he doesn't take a quarterback, I get both. And if he does take a quarterback, then I still have targets like Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson later on. So I actually will take Devontae Smith here and hope that, maybe it's Joe Burrow if he does go quarterback. And he doesn't go any. He goes with two running backs there, Kenneth Walker and Aaron Jones. The exact opposite, I think, of what you want to be doing if you're doing a 0 RB. That's also a big misconception is people will take their two wide receivers to start and automatically assume, hey, I got to catch up. I'm behind the 8 ball at running back. So now you overdraft guys like Kenneth Walker and Aaron Jones who don't have access to a, mid RB1 type of ceiling, even higher than that. Those guys are more so RB2 type of profiles. So like we're kind of saying with the premise of the video, if you're going to skip out at running back early and you're going to skip out on some legendary profiles like a guy like Bijan Robinson or even 20 plus PPR point per game profiles like some of the guys going in that range, it's completely counterintuitive to then go into the round 3-4 area and say, hey, now I want to solve my running back position. You're better off, like what I'm going to do here, getting an elite quarterback and getting a projectable wide receiver 2 in this range and keep stretching that area of when I need my running back to, again, like we were mentioning with King Capital's team, round 7, round 8 is when you're typically going to be getting your first running back in a 0 RB.
Yeah, you don't want to walk right into the running back dead zone, like basically what Team 12 did there. So your goal is to win the other positions. You don't want to just take two wide receivers and be like, oh, I'm doing a 0 RB, and then walk right into the RB dead zone and take two poor projections at the running back position. Although I don't hate Kenneth Walker, on Underdog, he goes in like the 5th round versus like the 312 where he went here, which I think is a little ludicrous at this point. So I would like to get an elite onesie. Unfortunately, the quarterbacks kind of dried up on me a little bit. I think I'm probably going to grab a wide receiver again here and hope that George Kittle slides back to me. I think that's probably the move I'm going to make, but I don't really have, honestly, that big of a lenience at wide receiver. I'm going to grab Jerry Jeudy here and hope that Kittle does come back to me, and he ends up doing that. So I could go with Justin Herbert. I could go with, Trevor Lawrence, somebody like that. I do believe on the way back at the 6'11", I should be able to get Deshaun Watson or a Dak Prescott or somebody in that range. I don't know. What are your thoughts in this position? Would you go with the elite tight end or would you go with the quarterback?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we'll assume that this is a 4-point passing touchdown league, and we'll assume that this is a non-tight end premium for E's sake. Of course, if it's a 6-point passing touchdown league with no tight end premium, you're going to favor the quarterback. If it's a 4-point passing touchdown league, 1.5 premium, you're going to favor the tight end. For me personally, I do like the structure of getting the tight end now because, like you said, if you're looking at round 7, round 8 area, you're still eyeing down the barrel of guys like Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott. Maybe, if you want to stretch it even further, a guy like Anthony Richardson you compare with Kirk Cousins, you have some options there to still make a top quarterback core. Whereas a guy like George Kittle, or maybe if you like Kyle Pitts as well, would be that difference maker at tight end that you simply can't get later on.
Yeah, I will say the one thing I'm going to do here is I am actually going to go quarterback because I have Herbert, Lawrence, and Watson, who I believe have a significant ceiling advantage over the rest of the quarterbacks.
Yes,
and I have Kittle, Pitts, Goddard, and Waller in a row. And I also have, options that I like, later, Pat Freiermuth, David Njoku, and such there. So I am actually going to go with Justin Herbert. I could go with Lawrence because I have Ridley and stack those guys up, but I actually do just like the projection a little bit cleaner for Justin Herbert as a guy that has already proven that he's an elite quarterback. I expect his offense to throw slightly more than Trevor Lawrence's, but maybe you get a little bit more added rushing with Trevor Lawrence, so that could be a tiebreaker as well. Could have gone either way. It's not really a player takes video, but I'll take Herbert there at 5-2.
Yeah, 100%. And now I'm eyeing down the barrel of a guy that I don't see come here at the late fifth quite often, but Christian Watson is a guy that routinely goes on underdog in the fourth round. I got a guy like Mike Williams as well, who I like, but I took him in the last mock. So I'm between a few good wide receivers here. So I think I'll let Team 12 make the choice for me there because, like you said, I don't want to be eyeing down the barrel at tight end and playing the weight game. I want to get a guy I think has an extremely high ceiling, and that guy for me is Kyle Pitts. So I'll just see what wide receivers potentially go in this turn, and no wide receivers go in the turn. Team 12 completely doing the inverse of a robust RB. I don't want to say like he grabbed his 2 wide receivers and now he just completely pivoted to a robust RB. This is like somebody who's heard about the idea of zero RB and wants to try it in the draft, but doesn't exactly know how to do it. That's what their zero RB would look like. Oh, I didn't grab a running back in the first 2 rounds, and now I got to catch up right for the rest of the rounds between round 3 and round 6.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. He almost did exactly the opposite of what we were talking about throughout the entire video. And you got your zero RB, which is built out, very well, versus his zero RB, which is built out like shit. So we'll see we'll see what you got going here. Christian Watson, to your point, never gets this far in standard home league sleeper drafts on underdog, again, due to the nature of the platform to some degree, because it's a best ball and he's like a big play type of wide receiver. But we definitely will have you covered in our redraft rankings manifesto 2.0. We will have like the biggest values relative from our rankings to certain platforms. So if you guys are playing on ESPN, maybe this player is more valuable. If you guys are playing on Sleeper, maybe Christian Watson is sliding at a better value than where he would normally go on like a site like Underdog, for example. So we'll definitely have that covered. Of course, use code FSE on Underdog to get access to that redraft rankings manifesto for just a $10 deposit. But I'll let you make your pick here.
Yeah, give me the upside here with the 3 stud wide receivers, all guys that I project to have, 27+% target shares, including Devontae Smith. While we think, of course, the overall piece of pie that he's getting that slice from is going to be relatively smaller than the Bills and the Lions, he should still get, a 28% target share of that Eagles offense. For me now, Christian Watson, like you kind of said, spike week potential, fills in the flex. I want a guy that can give me 20, 25 points any given week from the flex, and Christian Watson's profile fits that to a T.
Yeah, unfortunate for me that Goddard and Waller both go before my pick,
Ooh.
and that Mike Williams went 1 pick before me when I have Justin Herbert. That is what I was hoping would slide back to me. Okay, so I'm in at the 6'11 here. Am I going to reach into the dead zone? Probably not. 6'11, Rashad White and some of those guys. I may take my first running back here at 7:02 with Javonte Williams, though. What I am probably going to do here, though, is probably punt tight end yet again, because I'm just missing out on these tight end positions. And had I known that Deshaun Watson was going to fall back to me, and this is why you do mock drafts, if I knew Deshaun Watson was going to fall back to me, I would have gone with George Kittle at my first pick at the 5'2", and then taken Watson here at 6'11". So, this is why we do mock drafts. Maybe I don't go quarterback in that situation in the future. I am probably going to grab another wide receiver because, again, we want to be very strong at our flex positions. Even though I already have my 4 wide receivers locked down, you definitely want to have an abundance of talent at that position, and you can always trade too. And for me, the wide receivers on the board currently just project better than the running backs on the board currently. So I'd probably be between an upside swing like Jackson Smith and Jigba or Jordan Addison, as well as like a safe target share guy like a Marquise Brown, Tyler Lockett, or Mike Evans. Probably wouldn't go Christian Kirk because I already have Calvin Ridley there. I also really like Deontay Johnson at this point in the draft. I think I'm going to go with an upside swing, and I'm going to grab Jackson Smith and Jigba as my 5th wide receiver. I don't typically grab him in this format, but I do think, knowing that I already have my 4 wide receiver slots locked down, I'm probably only getting this guy into my lineup if he has a monster breakout season. And because Judy's my 4th wide receiver, he's a little bit riskier. I don't mind over investing in this position. Unfortunately for me, Javonte Williams did go off the board before my next pick, so I am probably going to wrap her back around and go with a tight end at this point in the draft. I believe a lot in the Jacksonville offense. I think that they can support 2 weapons here. So I'm actually going to go with Evan Ingram. To me, I talked about it in the tight end league winners video. Dallas Goedert and Evan Ingram, they go a little bit closer in the draft here, but on Underdog, they're typically like a 1.5 round, 2 round discount between those 2 guys, and their projections are very similar. Evan Ingram is probably not the 1 or 2 on his offense, but he could have big play potential, could have touchdown potential, and the same could be said for Dallas Goedert. He's not the 1 or 2 on his offense, but he plays in a good offense. Both of those guys play in really good offenses, and I would even make the argument that from a passing perspective, a pass volume perspective, efficiency perspective, that the Jags might actually be a little bit better for a tight end to operate as the 3rd target in his offense. So I'll take Ingram there, even though I already have Ridley.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that as well. You want pieces on good offenses. And although, Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley are there to command targets, Evan Ingram showed last year he can have a very succinct role on that team. I'm back on the clock here at the 7-Eleven, and I actually think I will grab my first running back here simply because there's a few wide receivers I don't mind making it back to me. Whereas there's one running back I feel like, especially in a zero RB, that I can rely upon early for some points, is on the board with David Montgomery. I've talked about it in the past. Obviously, we're both big believers on the talent level of a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, but realistically, at least early on, David Montgomery is going to give you some between the tackles work. David Montgomery is probably going to profile for that goal line role, given how Gibbs was used at Alabama last year. I believe he had 4 inside the 5 carries last year. So at least early on, I think David Montgomery is going to command that workload. Not to mention, he's not a complete zero in the passing game like Jamal Williams was for them last year. I feel like he can command some work. So I do think both of them have very strong projections of what I think could be a top 10 offense in Detroit. So like I said, give me David Montgomery. And then the next pick I'm going to be making here, again, I could potentially take another one running back and have less worries at the position, but I just see some elite projections from some of these wide receivers, especially the rookies with Jordan Addison. Jahan Dotson's a second-year player, but still kind of fits that profile. Even like Brandon Cooks, Quentin Johnson, a lot of good wide receivers here. So I will take another upside piece with Jordan Addison, a guy that we both viewed as almost right on par with. I actually had above, but you made the switch later on. Basically, right on par with JSN as a prospect.
Yeah, I mean, both of those guys are solid upside swings in like the 6th to 8th round where you're currently getting them. I'm going to be back on the clock here. I'm going to take my first running back here with Brian Robinson, a guy that I believe has a pretty good projection in terms of, early down work. When I have what I would say is a good positional advantage everywhere else, especially at wide receiver. Again, I wish I was a little bit better at quarterback and tight end, but such is life. I think I should be able to build out good volume pieces, good upside swings at the rest of the running back position. And after I make this pick, we're going to skip ahead to the end of the draft and kind of show you guys at the end how our running back cores ended up shaking out in these zero RBs that we built out. All right, so we have finished the draft now. We went 14 rounds deep. And again, watch the team construction, right? The whole point of this video was to properly build out a zero RB, know when to use it and how to use it. In terms of the players we got, it's not totally important. Don't like if you would have taken a different player, then take a different player in that spot. But in terms of what you want to do with the zero RB, like we said, 7 rounds, 8 rounds deep, you want to be very strong at wide receiver, very strong at quarterback, very strong at tight end. I actually prefer your team to my team because you got a little bit better value at quarterback and tight end than I did. But either way, and then once we get to the running back position, you can see the different archetypes that I took a shot on, and then I'll let you talk about your team here in a second. For the early portion of the season, you definitely want to get some guys that are projecting for early volume, like a Brian Robinson, a Damian Harris, a Raheem Mostert. And then you also want to mix in some upside swings, some handcuffs like Elijah Mitchell and Gus Edwards, or like an ambiguous backfield situation, a rookie running back with Roschon Johnson. So having multiple different outs with these running backs is definitely what you want to expose yourself to in a zero RB. And also remember too, like you're not married to these guys. If Roschon Johnson's, the 3rd string running back for the first 3 weeks of the season, I can cut bait with him, grab a different guy off the waiver wire, and maybe he works into my lineup. Or if Damian Harris is, hurt or something like that, I can cut bait with him and then I can, move somebody else into my lineup. You're basically, as we talked about, going to churn the bottom of your bench and look for running back production where you can get it. The nice thing is there's not going to be any shortage of running back injuries on any given NFL season. So you're going to be able to find, last year we had guys like Eno Benjamin, who I don't even know if he's on an NFL roster right now, who legitimately was like for a month, like an RB2 that you could have started.
Yeah, I don't know where. I know he signed with the Saints at some point last year, but yeah, no, that's a really, really good proving point. So maybe a guy like Keontae Ingram profiles to that this year, or Malik Davis. Like you never know when usable running back weeks are going to come. The macro structure of these zero RB teams are basically as follows: you want a guy who can figure into an ambiguous backfield. You want a guy who maybe projects as an elite handcuff, and you want a guy that could have some standalone value. So that's exactly how I profile my running back room as well with my zero RB. David Montgomery, a guy that I think could have some standalone value, maybe provide low-end RB2 value, punch in some touchdowns on what should be a good offense there in Detroit, especially in the early portion of the year, like I said when I made that pick. Guy like Khalil Herbert, who ambiguous backfield, showed some talent in spurts last year, working behind David Montgomery, and has a 3-down skill set. If you were to become that main running back for the Chicago Bears, then you go into the final 4 picks of my draft. Kendre Miller, ambiguous backfield with New Orleans. Don't know if Alvin Kamara is going to get suspended. They just spent day 2 capital on him. Maybe he figures into that rotation sooner rather than later. Tank Tank Bigsby, a guy who I view more as a handcuff that could potentially have standalone value, but I'm more so valuing him for his ability as a handcuff. Elite offense there with Jacksonville. We already talked about it this video. Works behind Travis Etienne, should be that clear-cut handcuff next to him to potentially receive some 3-down work there. Jeff Wilson, early season, we saw what he was able to do at the tail end of last year. They still haven't signed a veteran like Dalvin Cook, so I'm profiling he potentially be that between the tackles grinder for that Miami offense. And then finally, of course, Chase Brown. He profiles to be that exact backup, that exact handcuff for Joe Mixon, especially with the news of Travion Williams getting hurt. So don't mind taking the shot there on a guy that we both believed in the talent in the pre-draft process when it comes to Chase Brown.
Yeah, and again, similar to what we said for my team, Diggs, St. Brown, Smith, Watson, Jackson, Pitts. That's where like 80% of your production is going to come from on any given week. You just need David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, Kendre Miller, and all these guys to not screw it up. And if they don't screw it up, or if they do screw it up and you need to, cut bait with them and go churn the waiver wire, that's exactly what you're going to do.
Yeah, 100%. And not to mention building 2 through my flexes as well. I have enough, of course, for my flexes stopping at Christian Watson. We'll be getting 2 really, really good wide receiver values there. Obviously, you highlighted Jordan Addison and you highlighted Elijah Moore. Guys that I think could potentially be wide receiver 2s on very, very good offenses that could work into my flexes and I need them. Could work through bye weeks with a guy like Christian Watson. If he misses a week because he's on bye, I can just plug Jordan Addison or Elijah Moore in there without any worry.
Yeah, exactly. And I built out 4 wide receivers to start my draft. I take some shots on some upside rookies with JSN and with Quentin Johnson. QJ stacks up with my Herbert and so on and so forth. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this 0 RB video. If you guys are staunch 0 RB is terrible, I hope you guys, maybe your perspective changed a little bit. If you guys do like 0 RB or you have any questions about it, feel free to leave it down below in the comment section. Leave a like while you're down there. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here as well. If you guys want access to our redraft rankings manifesto 2.0, which has all of our tiers, all our positional rankings, a cheat sheet that you can print off to your draft, our contextualized game log series that you can go in and find out like how good was, Justin Jefferson when TJ Hawkinson came to the team. How good was CeeDee Lamb when Dak Prescott was healthy? All that stuff is available in our Redraft Rankings Manifesto 2.0, and you can get access to that by depositing just $10 on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE. If you already have an Underdog account or if you're in a state that you can't play Underdog, you can also get it on our site, flockfantasy.com/FSE, and over there, you'll also get all of our bonus content, articles, Dynasty rankings, all that good stuff. So if that interests you, check it out. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.